Hello, welcome to Conversations with Hannah. Today I am joined by two young gentlemen from Shrewsbury who I hope had the pleasure of interning with me this summer at the State House. I want to introduce Vishnu Angiras and Rohil Mohan. And today I thought it would be fun to just talk a little bit about what your experience was like interning. It's a unique experience that we have at the State House. It runs basically from depending if you're at college level and getting out in May or in high school level getting out in June, so the time you're out of school, through the end of July when we go into August recess. And so as part of the internship, you're attached to an office, but you also have a lot of things that are involved in a speaker series. So at least twice a day, every day of the week, there are speakers lined up to give you really a breadth and depth of understanding about state government. And so we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but I think first it would be great if you could just share a little bit about yourselves and what interested you in wanting to intern. And Vishnu, you started actually interning for me in the winter, doing some research before we even had a chance to work together in the State House. So tell me a little bit about yourself and why you wanted to intern.
Yeah, so I'm a rising senior at Shrewsbury High School, and I do speech and debate, which kind of brought my interest in politics. I do a lot of debate-related events, so I always have to research about current events, local events. So I thought, what better way to really see what's going on, not just see from the news perspective, than to intern. So that's what brought me into the state-level politics.
It's great. And you did some research this winter. You looked at concurrent surgery at hospitals because there had been issues years ago where doctors were working on two different patients and the patients weren't aware they were going to be both being worked on at the same time. And then you looked at some food donation issues to deal with the issues around food insecurity that we do a lot. So it was great to have your research that you were doing and helping us informed when bills were being filed. And then, we'll talk in a little bit about some of the things that you found most interesting in the State House. But Rohil, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wanted to become an intern.
So my name's Rohil. I go to Vishnu's arch rival school, St. John's, and I'm also a rising senior. I've always been very interested in politics in general. I'm in the school model UN club, and even though I've always had more of a science focus, I thought it'd be really interesting to explore how science is sort of legislated. So I kind of wanted to go into the State House, see how, in particular, public health decisions are made and stuff like that. And then I also found myself unexpectedly getting very interested in, the other aspects, for instance, taking the commuter rail every single day. I found the commuter rail committees very interesting. So stuff like that.
That's great, and it was fortunate. I do a lot of work in healthcare related things. I'm on the Healthcare Financing Committee and Public Health, so we got to talk about some of those issues. But tell me about the speaker series. Was there a speaker or two that you found to be most interesting, or is there something that you learned in that process that you just really hadn't thought about or known about before? Rohil, let's start with you.
I think if I had to go with my favorite speaker, it'd probably be A.G. Campbell.
Which was yesterday,
That
right?
was yesterday, yes. She came in, I thought she was, well, obviously she's brilliant. I mean, she's the Attorney General. But, she was very upfront about her experiences, starting off as a math major at Princeton, and then she went and studied Judaic studies. And I think that really appealed to me as, obviously I have a lot of different interests, so I'm trying to reconcile that all into a single identity. And I also really appreciated how she was very upfront in her beliefs, when she was probed on things like charter schools, which, as a strong progressive, she would be expected to disagree with. She stated her support. No waffling around it. I really appreciated that. So I thought she was a very impressive and inspiring speaker to learn from.
I've known her for a long time. We both were on a panel at the Kennedy Institute a couple years ago, and funny enough, it was Andrea when she was on the Boston City Council. It was our now Lieutenant Governor, Kim Driscoll, when she was mayor of Salem, one of my other colleagues at the State House, Trom Wynn, and then a Chelsea City Councilor at the time. And so it's funny to see where our lives, continue to take us. But she also has working for her our select board member in town, Carlos Garcia. So he had texted me yesterday with a picture of you guys saying, I just met your two interns. They're great. And I know that you asked a question yesterday. What did you ask the question of the...
So I asked her, she's spoken at length about how, she attended Princeton University at a time when affirmative action had not been overturned. So I asked her, obviously we hear a lot about, the broader debate as to who affirmative action hurts, et cetera. But as like a student at one of these schools, like what is her unique perspective with affirmative action?
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I thought it was really interesting. Like she talked about how, she was, like you always hear about affirmative action benefiting the students who benefit from it, but she talked about how like those students are also a benefit to the students around them, like who get to experience like students from a diverse range of backgrounds. So
Sure.
I thought it was really interesting.
That's great. And Vishnu, tell me, anyone in particular that really you just felt like I really learned something today, or I was really interested?
Yeah, definitely. I think A.G. Campbell was really good. We
Yeah.
were both there. I like that. Michael Curry was one. I'd
He was
never heard
great.
of him. Yeah,
The Community Health Center.
yes.
Yep.
He's the CEO of that, I believe.
Yes. Yep.
So he represents a lot of hospitals, and he talked a lot about his experiences, and almost along the same line of Rohil's question about the affirmative action. He talked about how the diversity of thoughts and ideas at the high level of government can help influence policymaking decisions. He was talking in particular during the COVID-19 pandemic. He was appointed to the Vaccination Council, I believe, for
Yes,
Charlie
yep.
Baker.
Yep. He was part of that.
Yeah, and they were talking about the different vaccines and which cities to distribute them to. And at the time, I think Pfizer and Moderna, the two-shot vaccines,
Yes.
were more effective. But they were talking for these poor or predominantly black neighborhoods in Boston and Worcester and other places. Many of the people on the board didn't have faith that people would show up for 2 vaccines, so they proposed instead for the Johnson & Johnson. But thanks to his advocacy and other people who also came from similar backgrounds, they were able to secure Pfizer and Moderna vaccines for our local communities. And I thought that was really interesting, how those diversities can lead to real-world impacts.
Those are great examples, and it's your life experiences help inform your advocacy work, and so it is important to have at the table diverse opinions to make sure that you don't have just one prevailing opinion, which is sort of speaking loudly but not necessarily representing the interests of all. And so I'm glad that you had the opportunity to hear from such great speakers. You were also supposed to meet with Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, and that was the day that the State House was shut down because we had the electrical fire, unfortunately. So I know they're still trying to find a time if they could reschedule in August and invite interns back in to meet, but I know that was disappointing. You guys had both been looking forward to hearing from them, and I know they were really disappointed too. There's nothing actually more powerful than meeting with young people who want to participate in public service. So I'm sure they're going to try and get that rescheduled. In addition to going to the speaker series, there was also committee hearings going on, and we always said, and Sophia, who you guys worked really close with, whose last day was yesterday working for me, Sophia Fleonis as my legislative aide, always encouraged you, if there's a hearing that you want to go to, if there's a briefing you want to go. Like, we want you to be exposed to as much as possible here. Vishnu, was there any committee hearing that was really interesting to you?
I would say there were 2. One of them was earlier on. I watched it online from my house. It was a hearing on an update for the MBTA's safety improvement plan. I thought that was really interesting because before coming into state politics, I kind of had more of an opaque view of what was really going on behind the scenes. So I saw like all these delays for the commuter rail, all the subway. I'm like, it's never going to get fixed. That kind of hopeless attitude that a lot of people have. But seeing this hearing kind of showed the process that was happening. I think last year Massachusetts appropriated, I think, $300 million to help improve the T and other MBTA services. So what was interesting about this hearing is hearing the new administrations testify about what they were doing and hearing the exact precise steps that they were taking. And I think that kind of opened the door to see, yes, there are improvements that are happening. Stuff is happening behind the scenes, even though I don't necessarily see it on the day-to-day.
Well, and as you took the commuter rail in all the time too, so you got the firsthand to see how things are going. For the most part, things on the Worcester-Framingham line are not that bad. I mean, typically things run on time. And but did you have any experiences on the T that were challenging?
Oh, well, I wouldn't say challenging. I think the commuter rail was pretty smooth. There was this one day that me and Rohil were supposed to come in. The train was delayed by, I think, like 20 minutes. But it turned out to be a good thing because this man was late by like 10 minutes.
I think he actually missed his train the first day.
Oh, really?
I did.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
I do recall that.
I have my own gripes with the commuter rail. I think for me personally, the most interesting hearing was the public health one. Obviously, they were talking about vaccine exemptions and religious exemptions, and I read about it, but I don't often get to meet with, like I met with a bunch of constituents from Shrewsbury and Westboro who were for religious vaccine exemptions,
Yep.
which even if I wasn't necessarily sure how I felt on the topic, it was pretty interesting to hear straight from them, like what.
That was a 9-hour hearing we had
Yeah,
the
it
other
was
day,
crazy.
which actually last session when we had the hearing, it was like 15 hours. But this year we had limited to 9
deadline.
hours to have it in Gardner Auditorium.
I mean, I thought it was kind of cool because on a whim, I just went outside and I asked one of Rep. Decker's aides if I could testify, and she was like, sure. So I went up there and I talked about one of the things I do know about, which are HPV vaccines. And yeah, it was a very enjoyable experience.
Yeah, and I hadn't seen your text saying, is it okay if I testify? And then all of a sudden I look and I hear the chair announcing our next speaker, our next person testifying is Rohil Mohan. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's my intern. So one of the pictures, hopefully that will show on the show, is of you testifying. But that is really, I was very glad you did that, because that is the point to having a public hearing, is to have people come in and to be able to testify. And now actually, as you said, you don't even have to come in. You can, because we're doing hybrid hearings, you can testify from home and you can watch from home. You could always watch hearings from home, but now you can testify. So it's powerful that we have the opportunity to do that. One of the other hearings that you went to was actually with Shrewsbury Town Manager Kevin Mitzigar and I, when we were testifying before the Joint Committee on Revenue. I think that was your first day.
I think so.
And we were testifying on a home rule petition for Shrewsbury, which is going to allow the town to exempt local property tax from the Roy family, where Ava Roy lives, which is allowed in law, but there's an odd thing in law that says that the minor's name must own the real estate, but minors can't own real estate in Massachusetts. So, and anyways, that bill went through the committee, and then it's been passed in the House, and we're just waiting on the Senate now. But it was great to be able to have you see that day. Kevin and I get up and testify on it. And then the other part that you guys were able to go to, things that interested you, and then sometimes I asked if you would go to it to take notes for me when I couldn't be in that two places at once, were some of the briefings. And briefings, again, are held on all different types of issues and on bills at the State House. So was there a briefing that you went to, Rohil, that you found particularly interesting?
Yeah, and even though it kind of seemed at first glance like it would be anything, but it was ASHRAE, which was like the Society for filtration system engineers, ventilation systems, all that stuff. And they managed most of the HVAC production in Massachusetts as an organization. So I went because why not? I thought, this is why I'm interning. And I was actually really encouraged. They talked about something I've worked with a lot are fume hoods. And I found out that I might have been operating them incorrectly. They talked about what I found really interesting. They talked about how ventilation systems all come together to have a significant impact on the amount of emissions a building is producing. And it was an entirely new perspective I wouldn't have considered. And I also was kind of encouraged by the fact that, this engineering group is spending an entire day of their time to come up to Beacon Hill, talk to people. They wanted to hear what I thought as an intern, which, it was a nice feeling. It was a nice experience. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
That's great. What about you, Vishnu? Anything stand out?
Yeah, I'd also agree the ASHRAE hearing was very interesting too, because many of their representatives, it wasn't the type of hearing or briefing where they talked to us. It was more they were talking with us.
Yeah.
And usually when you hear lobbying organizations or government relation groups, you think, oh, some special interest they're trying to push. But ASHRAE was more, it felt at least more of a goodwill kind of reach out. They knew the ways that air should be filtered, public safety, efficiency standards, all the sort. And they were basically telling the government, we know this stuff, we can help you. And they were having that outreach, which was nice. Another one that was interesting, there was this hearing on the electrification of commuter rails and MBTA. And we talked briefly about that.
Yep.
There are pros and cons. It's not as simple as we need to go net zero, we should electrify. But it was interesting to hear the different perspectives and the reasons for and against such a bill.
Yeah, and that's been a topic for a while, and I think it's going to continue to be a topic for a while here. But as you said, you can't just electrify everything without making sure that the grid also can handle the volume, and that's something that we've done some work on in the legislature in the last couple of years, and I think we're going to have more to do. But all the interconnectedness, also thinking about the challenges that we have with climate and emissions and having to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Certainly transportation is a huge one. Also buildings are a huge emitter. And so a lot of the common denominator of the things that you guys have been looking at is really, how do we meet our climate goals? How do we make sure that we are protecting ourselves, but also being smart about it. And the challenge too on electrification is, the technology increases amazingly every day. And I think you all, we talked about it in my office at one point, some of the challenges of, procuring the different locomotives and the different cars for the system. From the time they knew that they needed them and, put an order in to the time of delivery can be a decade. And you think about the changes in terms of, efficiency, even in how you build and operate. So there's a lot of work that we need to do on the transportation system. It took a long time to get to the breaking point, and it's going to take a long time to get back to a functioning system. But there is a lot going on behind the scenes. And to your earlier point, most people don't see that because all you see is what you experience, which can be mind-numbing. So tell me, a part of the job that you probably didn't have a lot of insight into, and most people don't, is the volume of constituent work that we do. So constituents either having an issue that they need help with, whether it's unemployment or a health insurance question, to everything from students writing in, from your high school, Shrewsbury High School. I get in the spring and the fall, I get letters in when the class is looking at advocacy and how they might want to affect change in the world. And so Rohil, one of the things you helped work on, I think I had 5 or 6 letters from students and responding, and they all had a different topic they were looking at. So you helped do some research. Tell me about that process.
So it was very funny. Some of the kids, like, hi Jake, and my middle school basketball teammate.
Played on Patrick's baseball team for many years too.
Yeah, so I think that was actually one of the most interesting things about doing constituent services. Like, all the names that would pop up were kids I'd grown up with. So that made writing the letters really fun. Yeah. Another thing I did, which was an experience, we had to mail all the Shrewsbury High School congratulation letters.
Yes.
So I think I sat there and I almost perfected like a robotic way of getting like as many letters done as possible.
Yep.
So I think I'm doing my own part to bridge the St. John's Shrewsbury High School disconnect. Like, I'm doing service for my peers at SHS. Like, if you got one of those letters, we mailed it.
Yep. That is something I do. I sign congratulations letters to all graduating seniors at Shrewsbury High School, St. John's High School, Westboro High School, and anyone. We also do letters out to surrounding colleges that when we get the list and then we recognize someone who graduates. So, but it is quite the undertaking because I have to sign them all, but then you all help fold stuff, address, label, get them out the door, and it is quite the endeavor.
That's kind of fun.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm glad that was. What about you, Vishnu?
I had some interesting work as well. Sometimes we'd get emails from constituents over various issues. I remember one had to do with traffic codes in Shrewsbury.
Yep.
And it's very interesting because many of these issues you don't think about. They don't affect me.
Right.
Some of them, but when you get them and you realize it's someone from your community, it's interesting how you can help them. So I reached out to local police officers to see what their takes were, looked at the local laws, and then it felt good to help someone within our own community.
No, it does. And I mean, honestly, there is no 2 days that are ever the same in this role. And you have, not only do you have 6,000 or 7,000 bills filed that you sort of, depending on who's reaching out to you, you have to go get yourself familiar with something. But the myriad of issues that constituents have that they're coming to you on, that they need help on, is something which is really takes up an enormous amount of time. It's a large part of the role of my legislative aide working on issues like that. And in the summer, we like to have you helping out with constituent issues because, again, I think it really shows you the side of public service that people don't really understand how large it is. The other thing that you, a couple times, Vishnu, you were on calls, and I don't know if you were Rohil, but we have had, as you know, we have so many people accessing our emergency shelter system here in Massachusetts, and in both Shrewsbury and Westboro, we have lodging facilities where people are staying, and that has been something that we've worked really closely with the town and with state government on. And I know we've done weekly calls with Shrewsbury and Westboro and the other people in state government who are part of it. I know there's a couple times I couldn't be on the calls because I was in hearing or session, and you all helped listen in and take notes along with Sophia. Tell me a little bit about what that experience was like.
Yeah, so a lot of the calls were essentially updates, seeing what was going on. So it would be mostly listening. It wouldn't really be from our side, but be hearing from the people on the ground. What are the needs of these people? What further things can the legislature do? what short-term solutions, medium-term, long-term, all of that was included. So it was just interesting to see the constant information loop. The reps and the aides were not oblivious to what was going on. They were checking in every week, and that was interesting.
Yeah, certainly. Any other experiences that come to mind from doing constituent work or briefings or anything that you all would like to share about?
I think it might have been
The call?
that. It could have been that. But another thing is, obviously, this is my home district, Shrewsbury, Westboro, and I'm friends with a lot of the kids in these districts. So just as sort of my own independent thing, I was at a Westboro High School graduation party.
Yeah.
So I just, we were all sitting in kind of a big circle. So I got their thoughts on it. I got a lot of, it actually kind of revealed to me how little, and I was the same way, you don't really know what's going on, like government-wise with the issues. So you kind of just assume, oh, what's going on? So it was really cool for me to be able to say, oh, my office is doing this right now in regards to the DHCD situation. So that was probably my favorite moment. And then also, we got a lot of calls about the gun bill.
Yes.
So taking those was a very fun experience, honestly. It was very interesting, like sort of navigating through what every constituent was concerned about.
Yeah, and originally, too, with the gun bill, they said we were going to vote on something by July 31st. The speaker was very intent on making that happen. And then a lot of people were concerned, legislators were having closed-door meetings on the gun bills. But actually, what we were doing was meeting with the speaker and the author of the gun bill, sharing our feedback and concerns and questions and things that we were hearing from our constituents around, uncertainty. And that led to the speaker saying, you know what, we're not going to do this by July 31st. We need to take some more time. We need to go back with these, really thoughtful questions, and we need to figure this out. And so that's really an example of, where a bill was put out, a timeline was put by the speaker, which is a very aggressive timeline. Constituents were concerned about some of the issues in there, and we were able to take what we were hearing, we were recording it, and then I was able to speak in meetings to say, here's some of what I'm hearing, and other reps from throughout the Commonwealth are hearing the same thing. And so it's a great example of actually government working to some degree and people having feedback being heard. And so, I don't know ultimately what it'll end up, I know changes will happen to the bill. I don't know what it'll end up looking like. Supposedly we're going to take it up in the fall. But I am glad that you guys were able to directly see, how something can come up. People can be really concerned and raising questions, and then we can take that feedback and have an impact on the process.
I think that was like I've personally, before I got here, I took great pride in being like almost a government skeptic, and especially in regards to local government, I was like,
I felt a similar way, yeah.
Right, but coming in here, I think it was very encouraging. Like, it definitely was very different from what I read about in like Politico and what I watch on like TV.
Yeah.
It was very collaborative. It was very, I feel like at the state levels, you're very in touch with the people you represent. Most people are. Most of the reps and senators like truly were very passionate about what they were doing, and it was actually like very, like I don't want to be corny, but it was like pretty inspiring to see.
Well, I remember we went over and had lunch together at Capitol Coffee Shop across the street one day, and then we were walking back, and I hear you talking to somebody behind me, and I turn around, and there had been 2 special elections, and it was one of the newly elected reps who you had apparently gotten to know at Capitol Coffee Shop and introduced me to, which I just found to be hilarious, that I am meeting my new colleague from my intern who has gotten to know him. But, in the area where my office is, as you know, there are Republicans and Democrats all down that office, and I don't think anyone would know who anyone is, and you certainly don't from a staffing perspective. I mean, it's everyone's helping each other, they're asking questions, and I hope and I believe you felt as interns that you are also just part of the team.
Yes.
There isn't sort of that hierarchy feeling of, and that's our goal, is to make everyone really feel welcome and part of the process and learning in that moment.
Yeah.
But so one last question for each of you. I know you're each working on a research project. Sophia had tasked you with sort of finding something that you find to be interesting and doing some research on it and coming back to me with what your thoughts are. And I know, Vishnu, you're working on the digital right to repair bill. Tell us, how did you choose that one?
Yeah, so it was a long process choosing bills. There's 4,000 of them right now. So I was looking at something a bit more contentious just to see how that plays right now. So right to repair, or digital right to repair, if you didn't know, many tech companies right now sort of hold a monopoly on repair. You can, yeah, exactly. Apple, Google, you can name them all. And you can't really repair, like their official parts, you can only find at authorized repair shops, which
Yep.
Apple or Google would say, yes, you can repair it. So because of that monopoly that they hold, they're able to make the parts more expensive. So like replacing your screen if you break it is upwards of $300. But if you went to your local repair shop, they could do it for a fraction of the price.
Sure.
So all of this is building momentum for this Right to Repair Act, they call it, which forces the manufacturers to make their parts, tools, and documentation available to everyone. Doesn't mean for free, they'd still sell it, but you're on the same level as those authorized shops,
Yep.
which theoretically could bring down prices and allow our devices to last longer. So
That's great.
it's the bill I was looking into. And it was interesting to see it's not as clear cut necessarily as some proponents would like to make it. As much as I support the bill,
Yep.
a lot of research showed that a lot of proponents say that, oh, this will bring down costs and save the environment. But one interesting research that I found showed that since repairs will be cheaper and since people will keep their phones for longer, manufacturers will want to recoup their prices or profits by bringing down the prices of their devices.
Yeah.
So this will benefit consumers, but also hurt the environment because consumers are more likely to
Sure.
swap through devices.
Yep.
So it is interesting to see how that plays, and it's not always a perfect situation, even with a bill that seems like common sense.
That's great insight. Sometimes when you think philosophically, oh yeah, this makes sense, but then you have to really understand from an implementation perspective and what are all the other potential unintended consequences that you have to wade through. Rohil, you were looking at a bill, it was called
S.1421 to prevent VIP syndrome in hospitals. So I thought, sorry.
no, go ahead, tell me.
Okay, so this was kind of shaped by my own personal experience in our local like healthcare centers. Oftentimes, like the Indian American community has a lot of physicians in it, and we know some. But like, it's kind of shocking to me. Like, you'll sit there in the waiting room for literally ever, and you'll see someone next to you who's like, oh, I know this person, and all of a sudden, they move up in front of like a 3-hour line, go in, and then they get seen out in 5 minutes, and that honestly really irritated me.
Yep.
I feel like that's not how our healthcare system should function. So when I wanted to do a bill related to healthcare because it's kind of like my favorite thing. But when I looked and I saw that there was a bill relative to this, basically what it does, it establishes a reporting system in which any member of the healthcare team can report any instance of VIP syndrome, which is basically when a patient is given treatment differential to the standard of care.
Sure.
Because
Yep.
of their status as a celebrity, they know someone, they're a physician. But as I read more into it, I was actually very interested because you'd think, oh, these patients who are getting treated, especially, they're getting better care than everyone else, but that's actually not the case. So I read a bunch of papers on this thing called VIP syndrome. Basically, the best course of treatment isn't always to do something, right? Sometimes you got to just sit back, put your hands up, and wait. But these patients, they come in, they're influential. They sort of disrupt the chain of command. Like, junior doctors won't want to treat for fear of
Sure.
liability.
Yep.
So the senior doctor will come in, which will undermine like the nurses and the residents. And in the process, they get lower quality care because the normal process by which healthcare is delivered isn't being applied to these VIPs. So I think what was really interesting is even for the people who supposedly benefit from this special treatment, like, it's not necessarily actually helping them.
Yep.
And I think that's one of my favorite things when you intersect science and policy. You get some really interesting conclusions.
Well, you guys did great work. And as I told you when we talked about doing this show, it will speed by and we'll run out of time. So I want to thank you both for interning for me this summer. I really enjoyed having both of you. You guys did just such great work. You're amazingly smart people. Your resumes are something that are intimidating to someone who's 52 years old and has done 1/4 of what you two have already done. So I appreciate all the work that you did for the office, and I hope you really enjoyed it. I think you did. You seemed to, and I really enjoyed having conversations with you guys in my office about a myriad of different issues. And this is why I like having interns, because I want to expose young people to what public service is, and that working at the State House and being part of the legislature is not what you see on the nightly news where people are going at each other. It's a very cerebral and collaborative environment. So thank you for being part of it. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Conversations with Hannah, and I'll see you again soon.